Good morning, Blue Mountain Community Church. Yes, this is Amos. Yes, I'm in my home. Yes, we are isolating. Yes, my family got COVID. No, we're doing just fine. Yes, this is my studio. And yes, this is pre-recorded for you, just in case I get sick. This is where the magic happens. This is where most of my creative writing takes place, and my drawing and my studio work, some of my art. This is where I often take a nap. And today's is where I'll be sharing my story. So thank you, welcome for being here. I even got dressed up for the occasion, so how about that? So I'd like to tell you a story. But before I do, I want to ask you a question. What are you burdened by? What do you need to be freed from? This story comes from Mark chapter 2 verses 3. Now it's not my story. It's God's story of how he revealed himself to us through people like us. Now I want you to imagine that you're standing in a field. And the field is full of ripe, full, lush grain stalks. It's almost harvest time. And the wheat is almost ready to be threshed. And you can see these stalks of grain rolling and hissing in the breeze. And beyond them you can see the Sea of Galilee shimmering and sparkling under the sunlight. And at the distance, to your right, is the city of Capernaum, shining and hustling and bustling. You can hear the noise of the people. And in the distance you can see a group of men walking towards you. They're laughing, they're talking, they're in conversation. And they're doing something else as they're switchbacking to and fro in this lush green golden wheat grass field. They're taking the heads off the grain and they're plucking them, popping them into their mouths. A delicious and satisfying snack for hungry bellies. And it's a beautiful scene. And there you can see Jesus walking with them. When all of a sudden, a shrieking voice shouts from behind, "Look! Look at those men!" You turn. You can see, standing off of the field, is a cluster of Pharisees. Black robe, white beards, head coverings, furrowed brows, pointing fingers, shaking fists, and they're shouting, "They're threshing! They're harvesting! They're breaking Sabbath law!" For even to pluck the head of a grain was considered work. And on this day was the Sabbath. And to pluck the head of the grain and to work on the Sabbath would mean actual, possible death. By this time, Jesus walks up to the Pharisees, who then look at him and say, Look at your disciples. How dare you let them break the Sabbath by working and harvesting on this day?" Jesus, ever the clever one, he says this. He says, "Really? Haven't you read what David did when he was hungry, along those who were with him? How he entered the sanctuary and ate fresh bread off the altar, with the chief priest Abiathar right there watching, holy bread that no one but the priests were allowed to eat. And then how he handed it out to his companions." The Pharisees stand, proud, puff-chested, stunned, speechless. They don't know what to say. Them and their colleagues have been debating this very story for centuries. And no one had come up with a clear answer. And yet Jesus throws that story right back in their faces. But he wasn't finished. Jesus says, the Sabbath was made to serve us. We weren't made to serve the Sabbath. The Son of Man is no lackey to the Sabbath. He's actually in charge. The Pharisees gasp. Furious, they clench their fists, and silently they turn and storm and march back to Capernaum. "We'll see," they whisper, "we'll see." Well, time passes. Another Sabbath day comes, and Jesus and disciples are making their way to the synagogue for morning service. And they can see the same Pharisees standing by the entryway, huddled in a circle. They're gathered, they're whispering, with conspiring looks on their faces and deceit in their eyes. "Is he going to be here?" they say. Yes. "The crippled man, you're sure he's going to show up?" "Absolutely," one of the Pharisees says. And what of Jesus? Will he take the bait? The elder Pharisee says, most certainly he will, for he cannot resist himself. Excellent, they say. Just as Jesus walks past, the elder Pharisee gives a blank smile. Good morning. Jesus nods and enters into the Sabbath through the entryway. And he and his disciples grab a seat on the floor on the mats. For the place was packed, the synagogue full, all the benches filled with people, men on the left, women on the right. The leader of the synagogue ready to take his spot at the podium, and the Pharisees walk into their place of high honor in the front row. Blessed be to the Lord, the service begins. And all ears and eyes are watching the leader of the synagogue, but the Pharisees, who are fixedly intent, staring down at Jesus. The auditorium is filled with the smoke from the candle stands, and the scents of the fumes fill the air, and the commands of the leader of the synagogue as he prays through the Psalms and the prophets fill and echo throughout the hall against the stone ceiling and the pillars and the floor. The service continues, moment after moment. The leader sits down, and another elder stands up, and he takes his place at the podium, and the service continues, and he takes a psalm and begins to read. The Pharisees do not take their gaze off of Jesus. When will he do it? They whisper. How much long must we wait? The elder Pharisee calms his comrades, his colleagues. Just give it a moment. He cannot resist. Just give him time. Well, the service continues on, when all of a sudden there's a pause, and finally, Jesus stands up. He lifts up his face and he stares down the Pharisees, locking eyes with each and every one. And then he looks to the man sitting next to him. Now the man, his eyes are worn, his face wrinkled, with years of pain and sorrow and suffering, for the man was disabled. His hand was withered. Paralysis struck him from the shoulder down. He's unable to move it, unable to work, unable to provide for his family. Jesus looks down at the man. Compassion fills him, and he lifts up his head and he stares back at the Pharisees. And he says to the man, he says, stand up and move to the middle of the room. Well, the man on the floor is quite startled. He can't believe that the attention's been brought to him. But he willingly, reluctantly, shamefully, sheepishly obeys. And he stands up and he shuffles towards the center of the synagogue. Now all the hundreds of eyes peering right on him. And then Jesus spoke to the people. The whole auditorium, the whole synagogue, now intently listening to Jesus. He says, what kind of action suits the Sabbath best? Jesus says, doing good or doing evil? Helping people or leaving them helpless? No one in the auditorium says a word. No one dares speak. The Pharisees' mouths shut tight. The answer is obvious. Of course, helping people. Doing good. Of course that's the answer. And in Sabbath law, you were allowed to save someone's life. Even if it was considered work. If it's a matter of life and death, go out of your way to save someone's life. But they don't have an answer. No one does. Jesus. I love Mark says this. This is why I love the Gospel of Mark. Jesus looks them in the eye, Mark says, one after another. Now just pause on this moment. How long this moment would have taken. We don't know how many Pharisees are sitting there. We don't know how many there are sitting in that row. We don't know how many are conspiring against Jesus, waiting to trap him and catch him in this act of doing good and helping someone. But Jesus takes the moment, with the entire auditorium on him, all that awkward tension, and he stares them down one by one. And this, I just love this about Mark. You see the humanity of Jesus. He is now angry, furious at their hard-heartedness. He's not passive in this moment. Jesus isn't benign in this moment. Jesus is furious in this moment. Using this old man, this withered, disabled person as a prop in a game, the robbing of this guy's humanity just enrages Jesus. And now with the man center stage, Jesus says to him, hold out your hand. The man, now I think probably realizing what's going on, maybe reluctantly, slowly lifts his hand, unsure, the test of faith. What would happen if he reached his hand and nothing happens? What would happen if he reaches out his hand and he's healed? I can imagine the man locking eyes with Jesus, unsure of what to do. And I can imagine Jesus looking back with an assured look of confidence and love, compassion. It's okay. The man reaches out his hand slowly, and it is healed, brand new, grasping, clenching, strong, totally healed, totally new. The man's life given back to him. The Pharisees, Mark says, got out as fast as they could. And I can imagine them springing up from their chairs. The trap is sprung. The trap is set. Jesus has done it again. He's broken Sabbath law one more time. But they don't stay to argue. They don't stay to care. They get up and they start mumbling and muttering to themselves, looking out for the Herodians, an aristocratic bunch of groups that sympathize with Herod Antipas. Now we've got him, they say. And soon the synagogue empties, all except Jesus, his disciples, and this man, who has now found new life. Now this story is fascinating. In ancient law, as I said, the Sabbath was one of the most revered laws in Judaism. It was a distinguishing marker of what it meant to be a Jew. And it wasn't just a matter of following this law. Like when I was a kid, it was, we still prescribed to no sports and no TV on Sunday. And maybe you're part of a generation like that. I know generations even further back, all the stores were closed on Sunday. I'm young enough to remember most stores being open on Sunday. I'm old enough to remember when some stores were still closed. But now that idea of like the sacred, sacrosanct Sunday being the day of rest, it's gone. But in ancient Jewish times, this is like the highest order. So much so that it wasn't just a matter of not like prescribing to Sabbath law. Is if you broke one tiny law or one idea of an interpretation of a law, you were breaking Sabbath and therefore throwing away all of God's promises and all of God's love and the very identity of what it meant to be a Jew. And it was incredibly important. And the Pharisees felt to themselves as the keepers of this law. But they no longer used this law to guide and help. They were using it as a weapon to suppress and burden and weigh people down. And here, this man who'd been suffering for who knows how long, maybe his whole life, burdened by the weight of his disease, was trapped in this life. And Jesus pushes the edge. He says, is it better to do good or evil? Is it better to help or not help? Now here's the thing, Jesus could have waited for the day to pass. This man had lived his whole life, probably, with a diseased arm. What would be another couple of hours? He could have waited till Sabbath was over to heal him. But Jesus makes a very, very clear distinction that through this healing, even though it wasn't a matter of his imminent life or death, it was a matter of his life and death. That he was actually able to break Sabbath, because to be involved with Jesus is to actually find life. And Jesus doesn't heal this man's arm. He restores his humanity to him. He brings back his life. He brings the man back from dead. This enrages the Pharisees. For who can perform a creative act like restoring life? Who says that they are actually in charge of Sabbath? God. God is the only one who has the authority. And so very subtly, Jesus says, he makes a clear mark in the sand of what he's about and who he's about. That he's about bringing freedom and life and restoration, and to be a participant in that work is actually a matter of life and death, of good and evil. So my friends, what are you burdened by? What do you need freedom from? What is a matter of life and death to you? Not physical life and death, but spiritual, holistic life and death. Where do you need Jesus to come in and tell you to rise and stand and stretch out your hand and find freedom? There is one who has the power to not only speak creation into existence, but to rule over the Sabbath and to bring life and freedom to all who hear his voice. And that's Jesus. Jesus is the one. So my friends, be encouraged. Not only does Jesus call Levi, this sin-sick guy who had no business being a part of his entourage, who had no business being a disciple of his, he is invited to the table, as we all are. Jesus calls out to the burden, to the down and out, to the shackled, to those who are desperate to be free, desperate to find new life. He reaches out and extends the same invitation to them. And my friends, that's you. All you need to do is listen for the Master's voice, and as he tells you to come, follow.